Another
Welcome
day.
back to
Welcome back,
Impact
guys.
Minded.
We're doing
Couldn't
it.
be, couldn't
Oh,
be
your
more.
tagline. We forgot. Welcome back, y'all.
Oh yeah, welcome back, y'all. See, I already this week. I'm a whole different person. I'm not
Yeah.
Southern. Christine died. Welcome back
She's
to
gone.
whatever this is. But I have a question for
Yeah.
you, Taylor.
Let's do it.
All right. So today we're talking about really stepping into this place of like doing it for the one. So I'm curious, when we're thinking about building businesses and going after missions, what do you think is the hardest or like most challenging, uncomfortable like phase of building and going after your mission and creating something new?
Mm-hmm. I think, and it might fly in the face of what a lot of people think, or where you might kind of initially land. I think it's after you start. I think it's, and I don't know what the time frame is, but let's say like a year after you start something, right? And you can start a business, you can start a new career, new role. I don't think it, necessarily has to be through the lens of entrepreneurship, but I think it's really, those early days are really like sexy and exciting. It's a new thing and you're starting it and you're engaging and there's ideas flowing around, and that's really, gotten publicized. I mean, there's so much out there in the world about the kind of allure of the new thing and having that idea and being self-made and all the things. And I think that you can ride that wave for a little while, whatever the time frame or timeline is. I think the most challenging part in season is after that wears off and you actually have to make it work. So then you have to take those ideas and that excitement and that energy, and you have to sustain that. 2, you have to replicate it. And 3, you have to stay in a season of being unsure about whether it's going to work out or not for a really long time. Right? Like those first early days, you're just riding the wave, and you kind of care less about whether or not it's going to work because you're so fired up and you believe it. Again, new job, new idea, new whatever. And then that kind of wears off and you're like, oh, I don't know. Like what's tomorrow look like? What's the thing? So to tie that into our conversation today, I think it's a challenging season because you have to continue to show up for the one. Right? Like once you get your idea off the ground, once you have that new role, once you have the thing, there's not typically a massive audience standing there waiting for you to just like lead and make an impact on. You have to build that. And you have to continue to build it and pour into it. And that is really where it takes a very singular focus on recognizing that your impact has a ripple, and we'll talk about that some today. But I think it's you have to literally show up for like the one subscriber to your newsletter, or the one team member that you have, your one hire, your one, there's always the first one. It's the new idea, a new product, a new process in your business. I mean, literally, like wherever you're at, there is a stage where like no one's paying attention and it's not being implemented, and you have to just trust that if you do that for long enough, there'll be another one and then another one. But I think it is just slower than we like to imagine, because we also get fed the like overnight success, and and the fact of the matter is just 99.99999% of everything is a slow burn. There's a few versions, and even those took way longer than we like to think. So yeah, I'm excited to talk about this today, because it's something that it's kind of a bit of a mantra for me. It's something I come back to a lot because, again, even once you reach certain levels of success and you do certain things, you kind of find yourself back in this position again. You have a new idea, a new product, a new service, a new job, a new hire, there's always the one. And so what I really want to preface this episode with is I want people to know that by the end of this episode, you'll have a new way to think about your impact in your business and why why your work is already making a difference. I really want people to leave with a reframe here to recognize that like it is already working and it is already making an impact. And even if it's for one person, it matters. So let's dive in. I want to talk about kind of the trap of chasing numbers. So like I said, in this world of like PR and it's everything's glamorized and everything looks sexier and it's overnight success and there's millions of followers and dollars and all the things. What we need to know is that is not the way it happens for the overwhelming majority of people. So break that down for us. Like why is it a trap? How do we get out of it? What are some like best practices for shifting that?
Yeah, I think part of it, it's interesting to think about this because it's always like the slowly, suddenly, right? Like overnight success starts with like this slowly, and then it looks like suddenly, but nobody sees like the undertone of that. And I think that is something that's really important to think about. It's like nobody just started, right? Everyone talks about Google starting and like they were in their garage and it sounds really sexy, but it doesn't just happen that way. There was still slowly there. And so I think this conversation, in this conversation, it's super important to like stop and get connected because in this place where like it's a trap and we're getting sucked into the numbers, I think that like it's because we're allowing ourselves to be abstract and not be connected to that. So I want to just like go off the cusp here real quick. And it, for me, the story that always resonates is the story about the starfish. You know, I have to bring an animal into this real quick.
Specifically an ocean-based animal. There's fish ones, there's starfish ones, there's the one about the fish didn't know he's a fish, and this is great. I don't remember the starfish one, so I'm excited to hear it again.
I'm excited to tell this story. This is where it starts for me and how I don't get caught in the numbers because I think about this story. But this is a true story. And if someone has access to this story and could find it on the internet, please send it to me. But I've remembered it for years over years. But there was a man that was on the beach and there was like a hurricane that had pulled all the starfish up onto the sand and they were dying. Like they were literally like baking in the sun and they were all going to be dead. And this man is like going and there's thousands all over the place. And this man is going and he's like grabbing the starfish and like tossing it back in, grabbing the starfish, tossing it back in. And this kid comes by and he goes, "You're never like, what are you doing? Like, you're never going to get them all back in." And he's like, "It doesn't matter how hard you try or they're going to die before you get the majority of them back in." And he picks up another starfish and he looks at it and he goes, "It matters to this one." And he throws it back in. And I think about that all of the time when I'm getting caught in the numbers and you put out a post or you put out a thing or you put out a job offer, right? And you're like, I need 5 more people because we just like scaled up. Like wherever you're at in this, it's like it can be super confronting because it doesn't feel like it matters. Even if you have a huge following, we can get apathetic in the process and just forget it that it matters for the one. So regardless of how many starfish that you have in front of you right now, if it's 1 or 1,000, do it for the one that's in your hand today, the one that you're in front of, the one that you're trying to attract today. And, you know, build the training process for your team, even if it's the one person on your team, do it for that one because that one matters. And I think that energetically, it's a lot easier. Like you and I have done lots of speaking. It's a lot easier to speak to a room full of people than it is to stand up and speak for the 3 or the 1, right? If one person shows up to your event, it can be very hard to show up with the same energy as if there was 5,000 people there. But if you create that pattern and you choose to do it for the 1, then you'll never be shifted and you'll never be moved because it won't matter if you're there in front of 1,000 people or 1 person because you're only doing it for the 1. And I think that's super important. And that's how we really stop that that place where we get stuck and we're just like obsessive with the numbers and the metrics. If we just have that mentality and we think back to that analogy, it takes the abstract off of this and we get out of the cycle because we're not obsessed with the numbers. We're obsessed with the impact that we get to make on the one person. And if we just focus on that, everything else follows. So yeah, let's go back to your question. I'm going to bounce it back at you from like a standpoint of like, let's talk about the metric part of it. Like you're really good at digging into that, but I wanted to like set it up from like a story perspective because that's where my brain connects and I have a hard time not getting over, right? Because we make it about us also. And so if we put out the post and we get one like or one person to sign up, we're like, oh, I'm not good enough. I suck. And that we just get stopped in that place. But if we think about it more from that impact perspective of what we get to do for the one, not do people like me, it's going to take us out of that place. So from there, Taylor, like hop into the metrics piece, hop into like, how do we get what, like, where do we get stuck in that? And then like, how do we get unstuck?
Yeah, there's a really good statistic that Forbes put out that I'll share just to preface that I think is really interesting is that that 80% of entrepreneurs quit within the first 18 months, not because they didn't think they were good enough, but because they didn't see results fast enough. And whether you're an entrepreneur or not, I think that statistic applies across the board, that there is this, if you don't stay committed, if you don't recognize your impact and really believe in the value that you're providing for the one, you will not be able to see it through because the results are going to take a long time, right? So if you cannot find your kind of purpose and meaning in doing it for one person, like it's going to be really hard to sit in it for long enough. And that, 80%, like that's crazy. That's like, it goes without saying, overwhelming majority. And that's just with one small group over a specific period of time in the study that Forbes did. If we applied that to other industries, I'm sure that there's equal or greater numbers there. But the way to shift that, one, and again, so thinking about a ripple, we call it a ripple of influence. This is actually work that we do a lot of, and we help people map this out specifically so that you can see your impact over and above just what's right in front of you. You can also understand like what your circle looks like and how to actually build a network that's meaningful. But there's a few ways that we can, I think, reframe that ripple. And one is to recognize that impact it's not just direct. So when we're getting bogged down and we feel like it doesn't matter, it's often because we don't see it right in front of us. Or maybe it is, I would say that it's always because we don't see it right in front of us. We're like, I got, it's one follower, it's one person, it's one customer, it's one, and it doesn't feel like it's happening fast enough. Impact is really so much about what spreads like beyond what we see. And we have to know that like when we do good work and we put value out in the world and we just focus on doing things well, that will spread, right? We do not know what's behind the person right in front of us. We don't know. There's just so many examples. This literally happened. Like it slaps me in the face all the time because I get really in my head about this stuff. And, and like you said, like you try to build something and you're like, where's the metrics and this, that, and the other. And somebody, like people reach out. People are like, oh, I've been following your stuff for a long time, or, oh, I've been reading your newsletters, or, oh, and like, you don't even know who's behind the scenes that's finding value. And it's just not in alignment with your timeline. And so like let's talk about like actionable things that we can do to really reframe this ripple of influence. If you can just help one client feel confident, they show up different. So I'm gonna talk about like client facing things. Same thing goes with team. So if you can just help one person, what that does is it actually helps them show up differently in their life, and then they have an influence on other people, right? So imagine you're in your work environment and you pour into one person on your team, right? You're having struggles with your team and you're not really sure, and people feel like they're out of line or whatever. Focus on one person, right? Well, what happens is that person goes and impacts other people. They go home and they show up differently for their family. They show up differently for the rest of the team that you're working with. And so it doesn't have to be about your input with every particular person. It's about impacting a few people really, really well, and then watching that spread. So it's kind of an economy of scale aspect of impact. Well, thinking about yeah, go ahead.
Real quick to that point, like there was a couple of studies done, and this was actually done like through trying to get like a specific message out. But they took two different ways of like getting a specific message out. So like on one, it was through speaking to people of like about 1,300 people at a time. And then the other one was speaking to like feeding into two people over the course of 5 years. So they found that if you feed into two people, just like your singular self feeds into two people and just shares that same message, but you drip on them and you actually help them engage it in their life, and you actually mentor them, and you insert yourself in that person's life, and you make sure that they understand that message. They found that actually would create a bigger ripple effect. You would impact more people by just feeding into two people and then teaching them how to feed into two people, and so on, right? Like that compounds. Then you could, by speaking on thousands of stages all over the world and speaking to 1,300 people at a time, which is crazy because it doesn't actually create the same impact if you're just, like spouting it out. It really is about focusing on just the one or two people in front of you and making sure that you saturate those one or two people with the impact that you were created to spread, right? Like that you're trying to get across. So if you just even start with those two and then those two go out, your product or service is going to get out faster, and you're going to make a bigger impact than you would if you were speaking on millions of stages. And like there's no real stickiness, right? That really sticky message doesn't actually get into people because there's no way to make sure that there's follow through. Like you might inspire one person or you might inspire 30% of that audience, but is there going to be actual action and change and transformation inserted into that person's life where they're going to go change another person's life out of that experience? And so I think that's another important way to kind of look at it, is like those small connections, starting with the one, is actually more powerful through the course of time if you're actually teaching them how to share that. That's why affiliate marketing is so powerful right now across social media, because we're feeding specifically into the one. And when that's done well, the influence follows.
Mm-hmm. So true. That actually, yeah, that's like exactly, plays into my next point in terms of just actionable takeaways with this thinking about your ripple is focus on just serving a small audience really deeply, right? Again, we get pulled into thinking like big numbers are all that matters, right? It's comparison culture. And the fact of the matter is, if you just pour into a small audience really, really deeply, they become your biggest advocates, right? They spread your message. So instead of casting your net wide, which is a strategy and certainly can be part of it, but like, who are your people, right? Like find your core folks, find your first couple of people, right? On the client side, on the team side, on the whatever, who like truly see what you're trying to do, truly believe in your mission and your vision, and just like pour into them. And to your point, yeah, like that's a crazy statistic that can have a greater impact. And there's a marketing statistic that says that that 64% of all purchasing decisions come from word of mouth, right? So as much as we're putting stuff out there in the world, and again, I'm talking about marketing, but the same applies, right? Like whether we're talking about the fundamental, like core foundation of what we're talking about applies to every area of our lives, for that matter. But yeah, like it's six of all of the ways that we have to get ourselves out in the world, and the list goes on, and AI and all these different layers. 64% of all purchasing decisions are word of mouth. Like so it's, again, build your advocates, focus on the one And I think the shift here is like almost not because you have to, but because you recognize that that's actually a truly valuable way to spend your time and energy, right? Like there's
Mhm.
very real statistics that support that. And so whether or not you're like, oh, this doesn't seem like it's worthwhile, like I want people to walk away today would be like to say, like, oh, it is worthwhile, right? Like literally, if there's two people on the other side of what you're trying to do, great, right? If there's one person, if one person shows up, and I always think about that, like specifically with social media, you're
Mhm.
like, oh, like only 10 people saw it. I'm like, dude, if you could get 10 people in a room, like, and you could talk to those people, you'd be fired up. I would be. Like, it's hard to get people together. So like
Mhm.
low numbers on social media, like, oh, it only got 300 views. How pumped would you be if you got 300 people in a room and you were able to share something that you cared about? You'd be fired up. You would crawl to talk to 300 people in person. And so I think
Yeah.
we just, it's skewed, right? Like I think we have to come back to recognizing that like small impact actually makes a really big difference. And again, I think you will find yourself in this place consistently because it starts over, right? As soon as you accomplish one thing, there's something else on the other side of that, and you start from scratch and you start from the one. So I think that comparison trap is something just to be like, there's a mindset shift there that's really, really impactful. And I always just try to compare it to like in-person stuff, right? When I first started like building businesses, there wasn't social media. So like that was the move. If I could get people in person, I used to do like workshops and stuff for in the health and wellness space. If I could get like 8 or 10 people to show up, I was fired up, right? And I tried to do as many of those a week as I could. And so now we have like the reach is so much more amplified that we've adjusted our expectations. I think it's unsustainable, or we've adjusted them in the wrong direction. Um,
Well, and
so
engagement is really huge too, right? Like if you could get 300 people who are engaged, like when we look at followers, even over likes, like 300 followers is someone who you have access to over and over, not just once. So if you got 300 people who are willing to like show up and see your stuff consistently every day or every week for the, next 10 years, like that's huge. But it just gets super abstract because we see all these influencers who have thousands of followers, or we see these huge teams who have thousands of employees, and we're like, we're not doing enough, we're not hitting the ball, we're not successful, we're not. And that's just not the case. Like we have to change how we're looking at success with this, otherwise we'll get lost in the numbers.
mhm. All right, I want to go to a few key like bullet points. So I want to keep building on how to shift your mindset when it comes to the one, and specifically how to do this so that you can stay the course. Because you and I can talk about this, and we've lived it. Like I do want people to hear like this is not just like this is a tool to be used. It's something that you and I talk a lot about. It's something that I remind myself of. I'm like, no, like you gotta keep at. I mean, we start this podcast. Like when you start this podcast, no one listens. And then slowly people listen. And like you have to do it because you believe in it and recognize that there's a ripple there. But three high level things that I want to leave people with. Or I want people to hear when we're talking about this mindset shift and how to actually make it sticky. If you feel like things aren't happening fast enough, or you feel like you don't have enough people in front of you, or if you feel like you're not getting through to these people, or again, whatever the scenario is, I want people to think about three things. One, I want you to think about or ask yourself, am I serving my people and my audience as powerfully as possible? So am I pouring into these people? Am I actually working to create advocates? Again, the best thing that you can do is to do great work. And if you can just put great stuff out in the world, it is impossible that it will not be successful. Now, it will take longer probably than you think, but eventually it will
Mm.
yield success. So just ask yourself, like, am I making the greatest impact that I can? The second one, and this builds on what I just said, am I focused on creating value instead of chasing numbers? This is a huge one for me. Like, are you doing things for the sake of doing them, not for getting some return? Right now, I know that we want to move the needle in key areas of our business and our life, and we need to make money and ROI and all those things. But it is a fact. If you just do things for the sake of, because you know that they are valuable and you believe in putting great work out in the world, you'll get far more back in return than doing it to like chase the numbers. So real growth comes from connections, not the algorithm. So you have to put value out there. You have to lead with value. And that's something that I believe very, very strongly in. And then next, ask yourself, the third one, do you trust that consistent high quality work is going to lead to long-term success? And I know that sounds simple at face value or maybe at first glance, but there's a lot of people, or let me just say, like, it is really easy not to trust that statement, right? So you truly have to believe that just being consistent over long periods of time, putting value out in the world and doing high quality work is actually going to be what leads to the success that you want. Because the fact of the matter is that overnight success is a myth and long-term consistency is the only thing that moves the needle. And I always say that you have to be consistent for longer than you ever thought possible. And then you have to keep going, right? Like, it is a war of attrition. You have to stick with it, right? And this, we gave the statistics, like 80% of people are giving up in the first 18 months. Yeah. And the supporting statistic to build on that is that 90% of businesses that survive past 5 years credit their long-term success to customer relationships, right? So the only reason they're there is because they've built meaningful, impactful relationships. They focused on that ripple. They focused on high impact connections, and then that's what builds, right? And then you can build the infrastructure around that. So those are my three actionable. If you get nothing else from this, like, ask yourself those questions, and then if the answer is no, what can you do to solve that, right? Again, like, are you leading with value? Are you making as much impact as possible? You trust that consistent, high quality work will actually get you to where you want to go? Make sure you can answer yes to all those questions. Thoughts?
I think the mantra that has helped me, because once you've asked those questions, putting it into action can be challenging, right? And like getting it into your workflow. I think the mantra that's helped me is like, I'm not going to give up 5 minutes before the miracle happens. And like, miracle before it sticks, right? And that, like, I say that, I find myself saying that all the time. Like, I'm not giving up 5 minutes before it happens. It could be 5 minutes from right now. It could be one follower from right now that you like strike the big client. It could be that one next step that you took. Don't give up 5 minutes before the miracle happens. Just keep going and keep taking action, because you don't know until you go.
Love it. So good. Beautiful. All right. Quick recap, and then we'll shut her down. 3 things. Remember that your work matters, even if only one person is listening. Make sure that you're focused on deep impact. I promise you that it is more valuable than vanity metrics. Just do good work and do that tomorrow and the next day and the next day. And it is impossible for that not to pay off. And the best businesses, teams, grow through trust, relationship, and consistency. So those are the 3 pillars, right? If people trust you, they recognize and feel that they can show up in true relationship with you, and they know that there's consistency there and you continue to show up. Those are 3 things that are always going to yield success. So do it for the one. Don't lose sight. Don't give up for the miracle happens. I forgot that you say that. I love it. And as always, you can find us on impactinitiative.network. You can reach out to us there. We would love to support you and help you understand, one, who are your one, right? I think recognizing that or figuring out who that is a challenge. So if you're not sure who your one is, that is work that we help people do and uncover. And if the mindset piece feels like a challenge, that is something that we would love to support on as well. So again, that's impactinitiative.network. Reach out to us. We would love to support you there. And until then, see you next time on Impact Minded.